in by clicking the link in the stream's description. The professor wants to hear from you.
Beginnings on the cusp. Not too old to adjust. Old dog, new tricks. Remember, I was just a pup. Something dirty in my cup. Clean soul, good car.
Isn't it lovely? I ain't looking back, I'm focused on what's in front of me. Everybody dates a number, but I'm still here luckily. I know that God got me, so I'm in good company. Isn't it lovely?
Welcome, and thank you once again. I am Professor Burr, and thank you for joining me today on the Burr's Thought. Today's episode is sponsored by Chops Cards and Print on Demands. Now, if you were anything like me as a kid, I collected baseball cards, football cards, wrestling cards, whatever kind of cards I could get my hands on, I collected. And I, of course, had the dream of one day I'm going to have my own card. Well, to tell some truth, I wasn't the greatest sports athlete out there, but I found a great way of still living out my dreams, and that's with Chops Cards and Print on Demand. They have some of the best quality cards in the game today. And because you know your old professor here, I'm going to get you 15% off your entire purchase. Yes, 15%. All you have to do is put in the code BEAR15, BEAR15, and you'll get 15% off your entire purchase. That's Chops, Cards, and Print on Demands, your number one for cards and print on demands. Now today, this special episode of Burr's Thought, I always am truthful when I do these. And when I have special guests, I truly try to do them justice by the intro. Well, this particular gentleman and his family helped put me on the path of being a great wrestling fan that I am today. My father, who was a great wrestling fan, brought us up on these people. And I am so lucky and blessed to have this true legend in the wrestling industry with me today, Mr. Ron Wright. Mr. Wright, how are you doing? Excuse me, Ron Fuller. I'm still nervous.
That's okay, Bear. You know,
I'm
Ron Wright, I know Ron Wright, knew Ron Wright very well, man. What a character that guy was.
Yes, sir. But again, trying to give you the proper intro, I cannot give it without screwing up your name. So if you give me 1 second, let me say the great Ron Fuller of the Fuller family. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Doing good.
I am so pleased to have you. And the one thing we talked about before we got on camera is how big of a fan my sister is of you. And she wanted me to let you know on camera how much she appreciates you and adores you even to this day.
Well, thank you very much to your sister. You know, too bad I can't meet her, but maybe someday I'll be able to come down and do one of these with you live or something.
That would be such a great, great honor. So, as I always start with my interviews, I want to start by asking you the question of how did you get started in the wrestling business?
Oh, well, it was very simple actually for me. You know, my brother too. You know, we were born into it basically. I guess we were supposed to be wrestlers by the time we were 6 or 8 years old, and we did a lot of wrestling and a lot of fighting too against each other back in that age time. But yeah, I'm a third generation wrestler and promoter. I'm just never just wrestled alone. I had 4 wrestling companies that I started, and so uh, I come from the oldest and the largest wrestling family on the planet.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, being that you are a third generation wrestler, what was your initial goals once you got into business? What were your personal goals outside of the family business?
Oh, geez, you know, obviously I wanted to be good as a wrestler. You know, I wanted to be as good as you know. I wanted to win some championships, and I managed to do that pretty much all over the world. And you know, it didn't just to wrestle in America. I've been to Australia. I've been to Japan. Wrestled throughout the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, all the way down to Puerto Rico, and all up through the Bahamas, Cayman Islands. So you know, I've been around, and I wanted to win championships, and I was lucky enough to do that. And it takes and growing up in a wrestling family, you know, we had a wrestling ring in the backyard, and there wasn't many people that did that that could say that, you know. And lots of times we lived on farms, and we put the ring in the barn so we could so the mat wouldn't be wet when we got ready to get out there and getting a good workout in. And so you know we my brother and I and we got a close other relative that he's a second generation wrestler, Jimmy Golden. Jimmy was around with us a lot and around us a lot, and so you know we just basically followed in our father's and my grandfather's footsteps. My grandfather started wrestling in 1920, and he was trained by a guy named Dutch Mantell. And I don't mean the Dutch Mantell you probably think about. I mean the original Dutch Mantell, the one that taught my grandfather to wrestle, as a matter of fact. And so, and then a quick story about Dutch Mantell, as a matter of fact. Dutch came to wrestle for me in my first wrestling company, Southeastern, 1975. Him and he wrestled partners with a guy named John Foley out of England. And Dutch's real name is Wayne Cowan. And so Dutch didn't like his name, and you know, and he kept telling me, Ron, I need to get a good wrestling name. And so you know, I couldn't tell him anything. I couldn't make any suggestion to him, but he was pretty much asking everybody, especially the old timers, when they came in. And so my dad came in to watch me wrestle and watch my wrestling matches and critique everything, tell me what was good, what was bad. And I saw him over there talking with Dutch. Kind of cornered him, and he said, you know, and I want to change my name. I want a good wrestling name. And you know, Wayne Cowan, that's no wrestling name. And so my dad and Dutch, you know, has that big mustache and all that hair all over his body and everything. He said, well, he says, you know, you look pretty much like a guy that trained my father to wrestle, a guy named Dutch Mantell. and he was big, brawny, little, big mustache and hair all over his body. And he goes, that was 50 years ago, and I don't see any reason why you couldn't go that route. And Dutch was like, rest of my career around Dutch, that's the first thing he wants to say. Gosh almighty, I remember I got my name from your daddy, So we had, so my grandfather started wrestling, I say, in 1920s. And the Dutch Mantell that I just brought up he was a tough son of a gun, man. He was really rugged. He knew how to shoot, and he knew how to really hurt you. And and that's what he did. He didn't want to train my grandfather. And my grandfather went to him, said, I'd like to be a wrestler. And he said, no, no, no. And he touched that Dutch accent, and he said, no, no, you two, you can't do that. You got to go. And then Roy, my grandfather's name was Roy. Roy kept going back. He went to him about 3 or 4 times, and finally Dutch said, okay, you really want it that bad. He said, I give it to you today. And they took him out back, and he broke his ribs. First move he made, he broke his ribs on purpose because he wanted him not to come back, and so Roy got up, and and he was kind of bent over sideways, and and Dutch says, you get hurt, Roy said, hey, yeah. And he said, okay. And he said, go. He took him right to the door, and he said, okay, bye. And Roy said, no. He says, I'll be back. And he said, oh, no, you be back? You sure? Yeah, I'll be back. And and I'm sure that wasn't the first guy that broke his ribs that didn't come back. But anyway, Roy came back, and he broke his wrist the second time. He just determined to get rid of him, basically, determined to get rid of him. And so Roy kept coming back. After his wrist got well, he came back again, and Dutch then started to have some respect for him. He said, you tough. You're not like most people, So and a real quick story, and I like to go off in these little stories. So Dutch ends up he had taught Roy to wrestle, and Roy hung out with him a whole lot, went and watched him wrestle before he really put Roy in the ring. But in Houston, Texas, they had 2 wrestling promoters, and so they had vying for the town, and one they had a they weren't trying to drive one was trying to drive the other out of business. So they finally sat down together, and they said, I'll tell you what. They said, you find the toughest guy you can find, and I'll find the toughest guy I can find. And we'll put them together, and whoever wins that match is going to own Houston. This was for Houston, Texas. Okay. So Dutch comes to Roy, and he says, Roy, they want me come Houston, Texas, have shoot in Houston. Whoever I beat, that he's my promoter. He's going to be the owner of Houston. Right? So Roy goes with him, and because back in the old days, Dutch was a very wealthy guy, because he had this way of gambling with people, and he would start out by saying, I bet you I can beat you at arm wrestling, and I bet you I can beat you at this. He'd lose at everything he did, and then he would say, you find the biggest guy you got around here, and I'll beat him at wrestling. And he would go into these saloons, and he'd get these bets started, and he'd lose, and every time he lost, everybody was in the saloon. They had won. They started running out and telling their friends, "Hey, there's a goof here. Well, you mean they come on down to the saloon and he's just giving money away. He can't do nothing. He's not, he's just like, so gosh, he'd go in the afternoons about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He'd be there about 6 or 7. He'd have half the town in the saloon, and he'd be making the bets would be small, fairly small at this point. And then he would finally get down to where he would race. He would say, let's go out in the street, get the fastest guy you got. And they'd mark off like 100 yards. They'd say go, and he'd lose at that. Now he's got the bets, pretty big. They're growing at this point. And so he says to him, and he has a guy that handles the money and handles the betting for him that goes with him. They ride horses. Back in those days, they were still riding horses. So they would go then in, and he would say, all right, that's it, man. I'm done. Because I can wrestle. I'm the toughest wrestler there ever was. And I want to wrestle the biggest and baddest guy you got in this town. And wow, they would empty out. The saloon would all run out. They'd all go back. They'd get their money and say, oh, gosh, this is it, man. This guy's we're going to get rich tonight. And then they would all flow back into the saloon. And when they all took the bets down, then it was covering all the bets. I cover everything. How much you want? Do you want $30? Okay, $30, whatever it was. And then he would go out. They would go out into the main road, which was a dirt road back in those days. They didn't have cars at that point. And they would go out there in the road, and the guy would say, go. And he would just take the guy down and run his arm up his back, break his leg, whatever. He just beat him within 30 seconds, right? And he'd take all the town's money. They're all broke. He's got every penny in town just about. And he gets on his horse, him and the guy that goes with him, and they'd ride off in the sunset. Then they go a week later and do another town 50 miles away or whatever. So Roy goes with Dutch on this trip to Houston. And Dutch says, you go watch my back. This bad deal got a lot riding on this, and I don't want to get hurt, and I don't want nobody sneak up on me. He goes, I don't care, if I see them, they hurting, like I'm gonna hurt them, so they go to the match, and so Roy goes down to the ring with him. The other wrestler comes in, and he has about 5 guys with him. And they stand down on the apron of the ring, or right there in the corner, his corner. Roy's there by himself in Dutch's corner. So they go in, they lock up, guy pushes him back in the ropes. They do a clean break, they lock up again. Dutch pushes the guy back in the ropes, and this time the guy takes a swing at him. And Roy said, when he told me this story, he said he had never seen him throw a punch, Dutch. He was just a wrestler, right? And he said he didn't know he could fight. And he said the guy threw the punch at him, he ducked it, he said he hit him right underneath the eye, where this big cheekbone is, right there, right? So hard that he broke that cheekbone, and the guy's eyeball fell out of his face and was dangling on those cords that keep your eye in there, right? And so he's got one eye looking straight out ahead, and he sees the crowd and everything. The other eye is showing him the mat down below, right? So instantly his equilibrium's gone. The guy, that's it. It's over. Deal's done, right? That's just the deal. So they get a towel, they put it over his eye, they get him out of the ring, they take him back to the dressing room, the 5 guys that's with him. And so then Roy gets behind Dutch, and Dutch starts going back toward the dressing room. He gets about halfway to his dressing room, and he changes his course, and he goes to the other guy's dressing room. The guy he's knocked his eye out. So when he goes to there, the guy's sitting on a stool. And Roy said he had a towel over his eye to hold his eye until they could get him in the hospital, take care of his eye. And he says, the Dutch went straight up to him, and the guy saw him coming with his one eye, and he was like, "Oh no, get him, no, get him back." And the Dutch said, "No, I don't hit you no more. I don't hit you no more." And he said, but he says, "It's a good thing you quit." He said, "Because I was already looking at that other eye."
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of where I come from. I come from that type of mindset. My grandfather was trained by Dutch, and he spent his career busting people up. I mean, Dutch taught him everything he knew, and so and my grandfather then created his first territory by going in and closing down the other wrestling promotions. He would find out where there was matches at, and he would go in. He'd kick the dressing room door open. He'd walk in, say, "My name's Roy Welch," and he goes, "None of you guys are wrestlers, and you're all finished." He said, "I don't ever see you in a ring anywhere in the country, or you're going to have to deal with me." And he would say, "Is there anybody here that don't like the idea?" And he didn't have, most of the time he didn't have any takers, but and if he did, he would just go at him right there. He'd take them right down in the dressing room, and so and then that's how he built his territories, basically from Kentucky south all the way to the Gulf Coast. Basically, he probably had at one time he had the biggest wrestling companies in the world.
Oh,
And
wow.
so then my father came along. Yeah, he learned to shoot. Roy taught him to shoot, just like Dutch had taught Roy, and my dad taught me and my brother how to do it. So we knew how to hurt guys if we needed to, and when you had a reputation of knowing how to do that, you didn't have many people mess with you. So that's just kind of where we went from there. We just both Rob and I got started about the same time. I played basketball at University of Miami, Clemson 1 year, rest of the time University of Miami, and started wrestling when I was about, I guess, 20 years old. Around 20 years old, I was wrestling. So, and Rob started before I did.
Wow. That is amazing. The one thing that I always loved about your family is what y'all said, it meant something. No matter when y'all did a promo, it was meaningful. It sold what you wanted it to sell. And as a kid growing up looking at a lot of that, it stuck with me to this day of learning how to make the audience engage and truly become a fan of the wrestler. I I grew up with like you said, Southeast Championship Wrestling. I was younger then, but Continental was what I remember most. And matter of fact, I still have tapes from Continental. That's how much of a fan I was and am. And I remember when you semi-retired and when you came out of retirement, it was a big deal, especially here in Knoxville. I mean, we would go crazy seeing you come out and your brother Robert, and your cousin. It was just such a I like to say a magical moment because you knew how to, like I said, just make us feel everything.
Yeah, we was that was a big company. Continental was the biggest wrestling company I ever started, and I had Southeastern there in Knoxville. I also had a Southeastern territory in Pensacola, Florida, on the Gulf Coast at the same time on few
Yeah,
territories. And then we put them back together. And we had the war in Knoxville, the wrestling war in Knoxville, 1979, I think it was. And we had this about 5 wrestlers that decided they wanted to take the territory. They wanted to steal my territory and put me out of business. And what they basically did is they put wrestling out of business for a while because fans got split, and half of them wanted to go see those guys, half of them wanted to go see the Southeastern guys, and so you know had to deal with the wrestling war, and it's, this area here is a tremendous wrestling area. It always was, and a lot of that's because when Roy came, he brought real wrestling from out of Ohio into the South, and he had great wrestlers. He had his own trainers that trained them. He trained the trainers, and then the trainers trained the guys the way that they wanted them to wrestle. And he taught them how to shoot. He taught them how to take care of themselves, and he ran a great operation, and and it stayed that way for a long, long time until Vince McMahon came and ruined the wrestling. So Continental, you mentioned Continental. There was a lot of good stars in Continental. There was a lot of good guys in that company. Uh, the Armstrongs were good. Bob and all his boys were great wrestlers, all of
yes,
them. And he had Mr. Olympia, he had exotic Adrian Street.
yes,
Speaking of shooters, that guy was a shooter. He was deadly. He was mad. You didn't mess with Street, and guys knew it. And the Nightmares. It was all kinds of great wrestlers that came through that territory with us, and that was back into the 80s.
and speaking about that, the wrestlers that came through went on to be great trainers. I mean, Dr. Tom Pritchard, Danny Davis, man, they've and trained so many of today's stars and the younger youth now. It's just so amazing. When I was blessed to have a conversation with Dr. Tom at one time, and where a 2-minute conversation turned into like a 30-minute convo, that he was so impressed of me knowing the wrestling knowledge I knew, especially about him. And plus, at the time, he had the original Texas title with him, showing it off. And I was like, oh man, I remember this. And we just bonded. But it is so amazing. And I tell people to this day that if you don't understand, if you're not from the South, you don't understand the real passion that we have as fans, because we knew you can holler, okay, wrestling's fake, wrestling this, wrestling that. But we knew that the guys that did it were real, and anytime they could hurt you when they wanted to. They
Yeah,
loved the sport and they wanted to protect the sport.
yeah, yep. And as Dr. Tom, I love Dr. Tom, man. What a great kid he was. He came to us as a young boy. Oh man, he was a mess. His he he was he was the most unusual young wrestler that I think I can ever remember, trying to get his life together. You know, he was just trying to figure out what I do to get my life together here. I need to do this and do that. And you know, and we spent, my brother and I, a lot of time with Tom. And you know, and Tom's trained a lot of great wrestlers. And like you said, like you mentioned, Danny Davis, one of the Nightmares, he trained some great wrestlers as well. And so, you know, it's a great sport. It's just a great sport. And it's I I say I'm going to be not wrestling anymore, and I've got to do this, not going to do that, but I always come back to it in one form or fashion. You know, I do these stud casts. I do quite a few things still that involve wrestling, and I just it's a big part of my life. Always has been, all the way back to my granddad and all the other people in my family.
It is.
My grandfather's brother. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, my grandfather's brother is named Herb Welch. Herb Welch. Herb lived on the far side of Tennessee, over around Dyersburg, little town of
Right.
Dyersburg. I was born there. My brother was born there. Jimmy was born there. It was the wrestling capital of the world at one time. There was probably 40 wrestlers that lived in Dyersburg, Tennessee, because that was Roy's headquarters. So, you know, so Herb was a heck of a wrestler, a tremendous wrestler. He was the world junior heavyweight champion, undefeated for 5 years straight. Had a car wreck. I don't know if he did. People used to say he'll never get beat, you know, and he had a car wreck after 5 years, and he was out of, crippled him up, and he came back and started wrestling after that. But there was Herb, Roy, Lester. They had a brother named Lester, another brother that wrestled named Jack. I mean, it's just, we have more than 20 people in the family that are wrestlers in one time or another, in one way or another. Fields family, the Hatfields family, that's a Welch tie-in. They're related to us, and so it's we've always have been the biggest there is, out there as far as number of people involved in it, and some guys are still hanging in there. Jimmy still wrestles a little bit, and Jimmy's 75 maybe. so, so you know, I quit about at 45. You know, so it's pretty hard to believe that some of these guys can go that long.
So, what do you think about the product today?
Wow. I don't think very much of it, to be honest with you. I don't like what happened. I don't like what happened and how Vince took over wrestling. And what he did is he killed the greatest sport in the history. You know, people say, "Oh, wrestling is bigger than it ever was." That's not true. There's no truth at all in that. I mean, wrestling was big starting in the 30s, all the way up into the 80s, and it's a and it now it's like acrobat. It might as well be a circus. I mean, you know, you see them do things off the top rope and dive over the top rope and into the floor, and you know. Back in our day, if he dived over the top rope at you, you just stepped out of the way. You know, and see how bad he could hurt himself.
Right.
Wow, that looked good, but when you get up. so you know, that's changed. It's changed dramatically, and not for the better, in my opinion. I think fans really miss, especially the older fans, the ones that saw real wrestling. You know, they don't like it. and I certainly don't like it. I had put a lot of people that I knew that made a living, that were very, very good at what they did, out of business, and it was a shame, because, like I say, back in the '60s, the '70s, on into the early '80s, uh, there were more people watching wrestling on television. There were 3 times more people watching wrestling on television than there is now with WWE. That's, people want to see the big buildings, but the big buildings, we had the big buildings full every night. They have the big building full for a television show. And, so it was a lot more fans, and it was a sad thing to see what happened. I hated to leave it, but I saw it coming, and you know, and I was ready to go. I was ready to do something else. I ended up getting in hockey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I ended up owning a hockey team in Nashville and one in Cincinnati.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and we played the Knoxville team. Well, back in the this is back in the late '80s, starting about 1989. Uh, I started a hockey team in Nashville, and 1990 I started another hockey team in Cincinnati. I had 2 teams in the same league. Nobody had
Oh,
ever
wow.
done that, you know. So yeah, when after that, I got into ADT business. I got into real business, and so I've tried a little bit of everything. I've had my hands in a little bit of everything, and and I've been very lucky. I was extremely successful. I had the 12th largest ADT dealership in North America
Oh,
in
wow.
Florida. So we were. I had 200 employees. It was like it was big time, man. And so I've kind of done a little bit of everything, man.
So, my final question for you: if a young guy it comes up to you now and say, "Mr. Fuller, could you give me some advice on wrestling?" What would you give him?
RJ's, man, it's not certainly not like it was back in the heyday. I mean, the chances of you being able, a guy being able to get in with WWE and make the big money, and there is no place to make any money if you're not in that company. They've got a couple of other little smaller operations, but they're not like that one. But there's really no place you can go and make a living wrestling anymore. We wrestle 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and and twice on Thanksgiving and twice on Christmas. Right? We wrestle in Knoxville in the afternoon, jump in the car and drive to Birmingham that same night and get in the ring again. So wrestle 9 times a week sometimes. So those days are gone. That's for sure. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't recommend anybody try to make a living in wrestling.
Mm. Well, um, again, I am very appreciative that you took the time out to come on my show. Again, I thank you so much because of the influence you had on not just me, my entire family for wrestling. To this day, I will argue with anyone on how wrestling and for especially for me in the 80s were some of the greatest wrestling times ever. Um, it was so much, you learn so many different things, not just how to wrestle. You learn how to talk. You learn how to sell not only yourself, but sell of the opponent, the this how you sold the company, the emotions. And for me, that means the world to me. And again, I'm just so grateful and thankful for you to take that time to talk to me and share with my fans of what wrestling is for us.
Well, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate it, Bear. And, you know, I'll try to visit with you again, maybe down the road here a little ways. Okay.
Yes, sir. You
Thank you
definitely
very much for having me on.
anytime you want to talk, no matter what you want to talk about, I I'm gonna take care of you. If that means bumping somebody to another time, you got first pick, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All righty, thank you.
Bye
Guys,
bye.
girls, thank you. And if you do nothing else with this interview, go and look up Mr. Fuller's family tree. Go look at what his family brought to the sport of wrestling, where wrestling wouldn't be where it is today without his family. You need to learn to respect what they've done and were able to get you where you are today. So with that being said, I am Professor Bear. This has been a Bear's Thought, and we'll see you around the campfire again. Y'all have a good one.